It began with the roar of 27 species, none of them human. The Colosseum was carved into the crust of a dead moon, its tiers lined with obsidian slabs and bio-sculpted throne pods. Creatures clicked, slithered, throbbed, and thrummed in anticipation. Above them, hovering in synchronized orbit, a swarm of gleaming silver drones broadcast every angle of the spectacle to the farthest tendrils of the Galactic Accord. Over 1 billion systems tuned in. Another 8 billion watched out of schadenfreude. None of them expected to remember the name of the boy. He stood barefoot on a plank platform slick with acidic rain, knees scraped, wrists bound with thick cord looped through a suspension rig overhead. His hair clung wet to his forehead. His shirt, a once white Terran fiber, hung in muddy ribbons. He did not shiver. He did not cry. He blinked slowly at the ovation of the universe and looked unimpressed. The crowd's anticipation was tinged with confusion. Executions were nothing new. But a child. There was a novelty to it. More than one Tentac governor had already approved betting pools. Odds favored death by Neurolance, although Plasmaflay had its fans among the Slarn. 2 enforcers flanked him, tall, black-armored, with smooth reflective visors and glowing cerulean eyes. Biomech hybrids, they were bred without emotion, without voice. They needed no face to intimidate. They simply stood there, as they had stood for centuries, avatars of the Accord's absolute power. "Honored citizens of the Galactic Accord," said a voice slick as oiled glass, piped in from above. "Today we witness the culmination of justice, a rare moment of moral clarity, beamed directly to your synapse feeds. For crimes against peace, for defiance of Accord, and for possession of prescribed Terran culture, the sentence is death." A pause, programmed for drama. The boy's name was never spoken. They'd erased it from the indictment. He was to die anonymously, symbolically, because symbols, after all, are easier to forget. Somewhere in the upper galleries, a sentient cloud passed what could be interpreted as popcorn to its neighbor. A slug diplomat inflated an air sac in mild amusement. A synthetic AI cluster giggled in binary as it live-streamed snark commentary. Humanity once sent diplomats. Now they send children with paperback books. Fascinating decline. The child tilted his chin upward. His lips moved. There was no microphone. No translator field. Just a whisper into the dark. The crowd quieted. For a moment, it seemed even the drones hesitated, hovering in that eternal blink before the strike. Then, with the elegance of inevitability, one of the enforcers raised its arm. A pulse rod emerged from its gauntlet with a soft hiss. Glowing. Humming. The child didn't flinch. Tension rippled across the tiers. Somewhere, a larval trader gurgled in discomfort. A Gorthian general shifted her triple jaw. The enforcer drove the rod into the child's chest. No scream. Just light. A blinding blue-white arc. The boy's body stiffened, once, twice, and then crumpled forward in the restraints like a puppet with its strings severed. Broadcast confirmed. Death time, 12:08 Gulf Standard Time. All systems. No appeals. Cheers rose from half the species in the stands. Others applauded politely. A few blinked, once, twice, in what passed for contemplation. The enforcers stepped back. The crowd began to disperse. At exactly 12:09 Gulf Standard Time, the comms blackout began. It started in the rim worlds, those far-flung orbital colonies on the edge of Accord space. Emergency beacons sputtered and died. Satellites spun wildly out of alignment. Data bursts jammed. Quantum relays failed. The Accord's flagship AI, CLE-09, experienced a 0.0004-second unscheduled shutdown. That had never happened before. At 12:10, the power grid on Velum Prime flickered. At 12:11, deep-orbit munitions depots in the Denarii cluster self-ignited. A single Terran virus, ancient, crude, brutally efficient, overrode 5 layers of biotech shielding and melted through the storage pods like butter through silk. No one had claimed responsibility. No one had sent a threat. But the Accord's oldest analysts, the few who still remembered Earth's final broadcast decades ago, began to panic. Because Earth hadn't spoken since the siege of Mars. Because Earth didn't send warnings. They sent consequences. Back on the moon, the boy's body still hung in the ropes. A technician, a scaled creature with retractable fingers and a nervous tick, was tasked with cleanup. It approached hesitantly, muttering curses in 6 dialects. As it reached out to cut the restraints, a high-pitched whine pierced the air. The drone swarm above began spinning, rapidly, like a swarm of insects on fire. A new feed took over. It wasn't Accord-approved. It wasn't traceable. A woman's face flickered into view. She looked human. She looked tired. She wore matte black armor, scarred and dust-covered, and her eyes, gray, unreadable, infinite, cut through every screen across the galaxy like razors dipped in ice water. "This is Mira Voss," she said, calmly. "You may remember me from such footnotes as Operation Wraithseed, and the reason your son turned off for 3.2 seconds. Across the universe, laughter choked in alien throats. She continued, unblinking. You executed a child on live broadcast. To prove a point. To show power. To entertain. Unfortunately for you, he was my nephew." Silence. Mira tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something far away. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "There are 8 minutes left." That was all she said. The feed cut. In the Accord's primary command station, panic was not an emotion easily expressed. It came in sudden temperature shifts. In chemical fogs. In how many pseudopods an admiral grew at once. But the panic now was unmistakable. Raw. Primal. 8 minutes. 8 minutes to what? They activated protocols. Defense shields. Planetary lockdowns. Emergency summits. But the virus was already inside them. They'd invited it in the moment they broadcast death like entertainment. And still, the boy hung there. Forgotten by the crowd. Discarded like a message no one had bothered to read. But he had whispered something. The technician who had cut him down later told investigators, before his memory core spontaneously combusted, that the boy had said 4 words. "She's already behind you." At 12:16 Gulf Standard Time, a minor sun exploded. And somewhere, on a world that once dared to laugh, the sky turned to fire. It wasn't war. Not in the traditional sense. It was remembrance. Delivered by a woman who had not forgotten the cost of silence. The execution was televised. But so was the reckoning. The sound of static filled the abandoned outpost long before the warning klaxons caught up. On asteroid T09, where nothing had functioned properly since the last ice age, or last budget cut, whichever came first, the air smelled of iron, ozone, and regret. Deep in a dim-lit supply chamber, a woman sat cross-legged atop a crate of unstable ordnance, gnawing on a strip of dried meat like the galaxy's worst guest at the worst camping trip. She had a rifle laid across her lap. Matte black. Terran make. Older than most living bureaucrats. Its edges were worn smooth where fingers had gripped too tightly, too long. Her name was Mira Voss. She did not blink when the first detonation report came through on her cracked comm. She simply paused, chewed once more, and muttered, "Right on time." On paper, assuming there was still paper, Mira didn't exist. Officially, she died on Proxima Red during an incursion no one claimed and everyone denied. Unofficially, she'd retired, after orchestrating a surgical strike that turned a planetary defense grid into abstract art. The truth, as always, was less glamorous. She'd been tired. Not of war. Of watching people pretend justice had a face. Of seeing children pay bills empires were too cowardly to cover. Now they'd killed her nephew. On camera. For a paperback. She tossed the last bite of jerky aside and cracked her neck. 8 minutes, she murmured. More than I need. With deliberate calm, she tapped into a panel embedded in the floor beside her. Dust hissed from the seams. The old Terran uplink hummed to life, bathed in flickering green light. The interface was pre-fall, pre-treaty, and gloriously unpatched. It blinked once. Then read her DNA. And opened. A ghost greeted her. "Welcome back, Commander Voss," said the AI voice, feminine, clipped, still flavored with ancient Earth sarcasm. "Have you come to finish what you didn't start?" "I'm not here to start anything, Ariadne," Mira replied. "Just here to turn the lights out." Authorization code. Wild things. Full release. The system froze, then flickered. "I hope you know," the AI said after a pause, "they won't survive this." Mira adjusted her gloves. "Good. I wasn't aiming for survival. I was aiming for memory." The crate beside her clicked open, revealing a scatter of command beacons and shape-charged transmitters. She pocketed 4, clipped 2 to her belt, slid 1 into the side port of her rifle. The lights overhead flickered, more from age than drama, but the timing was impeccable. Outside, the asteroid shook faintly, just a cough, not a death rattle. Mira made her way down the corridor, boots crunching over glass and the bones of dreams. She passed a faded mural of Earth, green continents, blue seas, and someone had scrawled a profanity in 3 languages over the Atlantic. It still made her smile. At the hangar bay, her ship waited. She called it the Apology. It had no registration, no personality core, no seat warmer, just a hull lined with stealth plating, a coffin-sized fusion cell, and weaponry that shouldn't have fit inside a cruiser, let alone something the size of a cargo van. It also had one feature the Accord never figured out how to trace: silent ignition. Mira climbed in, sealed the hatch, set coordinates manually. The stars lit up in her vision like old scars blinking back to life. "Engage Ghost Protocol," she whispered. The Apology responded with a single tone. Soft. Deadly. As the engines purred to life, Mira let her thoughts drift. Not to the boy. No, not yet. Her mind wandered to the Accord, to every smug, slug-faced diplomat who believed extinction was a political tool. To every sanctioned execution disguised as ceremony. To every vote cast with a tentacle. She'd warned them. Years ago. In the war room. In the after-battle councils. "You want to bully Earth? Fine," she had said. "Just don't make it personal." They hadn't listened. She punched the ignition. The asteroid blurred behind her, then vanished in a shudder of burned air. Across the stars, the chain reaction had already begun. Mira hadn't planted bombs. She'd planted seeds. Old Terran sleeper code embedded in long-forgotten systems. Earth didn't need fleets. It needed memory. And vengeance, well-timed, dressed like a ghost. One by one, the Accord's proudest outposts began to fail. On Varnak 3, the High Council's planetary shield inverted, cooking half the Senate in 2 seconds. On Relat Prime, the diplomatic archives began broadcasting classified files to every public node. The treaty that allowed forced human relocations now required reading in children's programs. On Tylos, an ancient war satellite blinked awake after 80 years and began systematically removing every orbital structure larger than a broom closet. Still, no blood. Not yet. Just systems crumbling. Truth leaking. Power laughing at its own fragility. Mira landed on a derelict satellite station just outside the inner ring, a station that once coordinated Accord transmissions. She rerouted her signal through 6 backup frequencies, and a prototype encryption protocol Earth had developed just before it stopped trusting encryption altogether. She stared at the camera. When she spoke, her voice was low. No fury. Fury was what they expected. She gave them surgical stillness instead. "You sent a message today," she said. "You thought it would make others afraid. You were half right." She let that sit. "You made me remember. You made me remember who I was, and what I buried to make peace." She leaned slightly forward, the crack of old scarring visible beneath her collar. "You broadcast his death. So I'm broadcasting yours. Not in bodies. Not in screams. But in memory." She lifted the rifle, slowly, like a prayer. 1 shot. Per world. Per vote. That's all. Call it a reckoning. Call it Earth's bedtime story. The signal cut. She sat in silence, watching as one by one, planets dimmed. 100 by now. Maybe more. Each one had cast a vote. Each one had laughed. Each one would remember the cost. In her chest, something ached. Not grief. Not satisfaction. Just the weight of doing what no one else had dared. She pulled out the boy's photo, a battered snapshot folded into a coin-sized locket. His smile was crooked. He'd made that stupid hand sign the kids thought was cool. She'd called it idiotic. He'd called it Terran pride. Mira pressed the locket to her forehead, then slipped it back into her chest pocket. The screen before her lit up with a message. Primary Accord Signal Hub. Capital Ring. Locked. Not for long, she whispered. The last 8 seconds ticked. She smiled and launched toward the heart of the Empire. High Chancellor Galactic of the Third Spawning Pool was not accustomed to disruptions, especially not during his scheduled gelatin soak. The spa chamber was cavernous and humid, designed for maximum membrane elasticity. Fronds of bioluminescent kelp waved in rhythm with the thermal vents. The Chancellor floated comfortably, sipping liquefied larval tea through a feeding tube implanted behind his third gill. 4 aides buzzed nearby, translating reports into digestible summary tones. A 5th aide combusted spontaneously when the first emergency notice chimed. "Repeat that," Galactic gurgled, twitching his left eye cluster. The remaining aide, an iridescent fungus with a fondness for protocol, quivered. "Sir, Velum Prime has lost atmospheric containment. Reports suggest complete power grid collapse." "Velum Prime doesn't have power failures," the Chancellor said, rising slightly from his gelatin tub, tea forgotten. "It runs on a trinary crystal lattice, impervious to hacks, immune to decay." "Nevertheless," said the aide, "they are currently trying to reroute life support through agricultural drones." Galactic blinked each eye individually, a tick from his early spawning days. "Did the humans do this?" "We are uncertain," the aide offered, which in political language meant absolutely yes, but no one wants to admit it yet. A second report arrived, this time from the outer diplomatic relay in the Tyreek quadrant. Its final transmission had been 3 seconds of static, followed by a grainy still frame. Mira Voss, pointing directly at the camera, with coordinates burned into the image. Her face was already becoming an icon. Not through propaganda. Through consequence. In the time it took Galactic to slough out of the spa, 3 more systems had gone dark. On Carat 9, weather control grids overloaded and rained fire instead of moisture. On Dractel, orbital defense cannons turned inward, flattening their own command towers. On Kilo Prime, every citizen's hollow assistant displayed a child's voice whispering, "You voted." She remembered. Mira watched the chaos unfold from inside the Apology, orbiting just outside Accord Capital's defense perimeter. Her ship was dark. Systems cold. Engines humming at frequencies just below detection. She didn't smile. Not yet. Her fingers danced over the old Terran interface, rerouting final phase packets through solar relay stations once thought decommissioned. The codes she used were older than the Accord's charter, buried in the deepest fault lines of military memory. She didn't invent them. She just made sure no one forgot where to look. She checked her chronometer. 12:14 Gulf Standard Time. Her eyes flicked to the map. A blinking constellation of red marked every Accord world complicit in the broadcasted execution. She had no intention of glassing them. That would be too kind. No, Mira was here to make sure their own systems did the work. That their luxuries became weapons, their comforts turned to teeth. The Accord thrived on control, of air, data, law, illusion. So she fed them poison disguised as power. Inside the Grand Tribunal Tower, located at the heart of Accord Central, things were not going well. "Emergency planetary lockdowns have failed," shouted a liaison whose face was a flickering hologram of a dozen species, rapidly losing cohesion. "Orbital stabilizers are adapting hostile parameters." "Adapting?" hissed Galactic, now dried and furious. "Machines do not adapt on their own." A second hologram blinked in, a reptilian economist from the Rack Syndicate. "We've identified the source of the cascade failures. They're all rooted in dormant Terran architecture. Pre-expansion. Deep buried. Probably mistaken for debris." You mean we've been living on human traps for decades? It would appear, said the economist, as his connection crackled, that we paved our empires over their minefields. And this Mira, she activates them now? Not all at once, another aide chimed in. It's choreographed, deliberate, like she's teaching us something. Outside the tribunal tower, the skies flickered. Atmospheric filters shut off. The normally blue-green clouds twisted into a smoggy red. Civic lighting displayed Earth's old war banner. Not a flag, but a quote. Speak softly, but map the exits. Back on her ship, Mira stood in silence. The systems were doing what they were meant to. She'd programmed none of it for death. She didn't want another massacre. What she wanted was much older, much quieter. Memory. She'd read the Accord's sanitized version of Earth's fall. How humanity had collapsed due to internal entropy and unsustainable aggression. No mention of embargoes. No mention of cultural erasure. No mention of children hunted for contraband ideas. Her nephew had died for a book. A $10 paperback that had once sat on her own shelf. She remembered reading it to him during a blackout, his fingers tracing the words like sacred glyphs. Now the universe would trace them, too. She patched into the broadcast grid, overriding the feed from a public commerce station orbiting Juru 6. It was a cooking show. A mollusk was flambeing its own tentacle for ratings. The screen went black. Then, Mira. She stood alone in a field of stars. No backdrop. No music. Just her voice, sharp and still. Good evening, she said. Or morning. Or whatever passes for time where you are. She let it breathe. You've noticed by now that your toys are misbehaving. That's not sabotage. That's history. A pause. You built your comfort on amnesia. On forgetting what you did. Who you hurt. On punishing us when we didn't play along. She looked into the lens like she could see them all. Every diplomat, every general, every citizen who'd called it necessary. You executed a boy for remembering where he came from. So I've decided to remind you where you came from. The screen cut to footage, pulled from Accord archives they thought were sealed. Executions. Forced relocations. Cultural purges. The audience, unprepared, saw the truth not as rumor, but as evidence. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Galactic stared in silence as the projection finished. He wasn't angry anymore. He was afraid. Because he finally understood, Mira Voss wasn't trying to win. She was trying to ensure no one ever again confused silence with peace. Deactivate the network, he rasped. The aides hesitated. Sir, it's not connected anymore. It's autonomous. The room fell into chaos. Mira leaned back, staring out at the ring of ships scrambling above the capital. She wouldn't fire on them. She didn't need to. Their own systems had turned inward. The missiles were reprogrammed. The defense turrets reversed. No one died unless they fired first. She hadn't come to kill. She'd come to make them watch. Watch what forgetting cost. Watch what arrogance invited. She uploaded one final message into the public feed, a still image of the boy. No caption. No warning. Just a face. Just a child. Then she shut it all off. The silence that followed was not absence. It was impact. It echoed louder than bombs. It sounded like the first lesson. And across the galaxy, stars, once proud, once smug, once certain, screamed like children learning what it meant to feel. There were no alarms left to ring. On the capital world of the Accord, once a monument to unified control, economic dominance, and spotless order, light no longer meant safety. It meant failure. Screens that once pulsed with curated truth now displayed a single static image. A boy, unnamed, staring directly into the soul of a galaxy that had voted to forget him. The tribunal buildings stood cracked and empty, some still smoldering from internal system failures. Not one Terran weapon had touched them. Their own infrastructure had done the work, slow, surgical, and devastating in its symbolism. The largest hollow statue in the central square, which once bore the likeness of High Chancellor Galactic in ceremonial gelatin robes, now displayed the child's silhouette instead. A shadow etched in light. Mira Voss walked through the ash with no weapon drawn. Her boots left no trail. The air was too dry, too burned. Buildings gaped open like cracked skulls. Here and there, aliens wandered, silent, wide-eyed, disarmed. They didn't run. She didn't threaten. She didn't have to. They knew who she was. They knew what she had done. Or more precisely, what she had made them see. She passed a group of civilians crouched by an emptied water trough. One of them, a species with translucent skin and iridescent fins, bowed its head as she passed. Another simply whispered, "I didn't know." Mira paused, tilted her head slightly. "No one did," she said. "That was the point." She continued forward. The main hall of the Grand Tribunal had collapsed inward. The podium was buried beneath a canopy of shattered glass and scorched banners. Mira climbed through the wreckage with casual steps, ducking beneath the skeletal remains of a diplomatic drone whose last transmission had been a legal citation against unauthorized historical restoration. At the center of the hall, the Accord's final assembly table remained intact, 36 seats, each meant to represent a civilization, now empty. No flames. No corpses. Just silence. Mira stood at its center. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. The boy's photo still fit perfectly between her fingers. Creased, stained, familiar. A flash of his grin. That stupid Terran hand sign. That endless sky behind him. He had loved the idea of stars, how they didn't judge, only watched. And how one day, maybe, they would remember. She placed the locket in the center of the table. A quiet chime echoed through the chamber. Not hers. The surviving Accord systems, those that hadn't shut down, turned traitor, or self-immolated, were coming back online. Slowly, carefully, cautiously. Like children waking after a nightmare they helped create. Mira didn't interfere. Let them watch her. Let them decide what to record. Then she spoke. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "That would be easy. That would burn fast." She turned in a slow circle, facing no one and everyone. "This is about memory. About what it costs to erase the parts of history that hurt. About how cruelty becomes ritual when no one speaks its name." A flicker of red light spun above the table, an old emergency broadcast symbol, now decommissioned. The Accord's central comm node had been set to auto-restore in the event of total failure. It blinked, desperate for instruction. Mira leaned down, whispered into it. "Remember him." The light turned green. She walked away. Outside, the world was beginning to move again. Not forward. Not yet. Just again. A woman with 3 eyes swept debris from a food stall. A feathered courier carried a child whose translator chip sparked every third word. A sanitation drone restarted its route and paused at Myra's feet, confused by the absence of trash. She kept walking. Back to the apology. Back to the silence of stars and a sky that didn't ask questions. She passed through the checkpoint ruins without challenge. No one wanted to stop her. No one dared. She wasn't a threat anymore. She was a consequence. Inside her ship, the lights were low. Power hummed steady. She buckled into her pilot chair and ran one last diagnostic. No weapons armed. No targets remaining. She'd finished what she came for. The console pinged. A transmission. Unmarked. Unrouted. Untraceable. She tapped it. A child's voice filled the cabin. Not her nephew's, but similar, older now. A recording. "Hi, Aunt Mira. If you're hearing this, I guess it happened." She froze. "I wanted you to know, I wasn't scared. Not really. I kept thinking about that dumb storybook you gave me. The one with the wild things and the island. Where the boy becomes king." He laughed softly. She closed her eyes. "Don't get too mad, okay? Just make them remember I was here. That's all. That's enough." The message ended. Mira sat in the silence, her breath slow, her eyes dry. She didn't cry. She reached for the throttle. But she didn't launch. Outside her cockpit window, something had changed. In the Capitol Square, the hologram had shifted again. The boy was still there, but beside him now stood a second figure. A woman, tall, shadowed, watching the stars, watching them burn and be reborn. Someone had added her, without approval, without fear, just memory. Mira leaned back. 8 minutes, she thought. That's all it took. She set a new course, out beyond the trade lanes, beyond even the rim. Somewhere quiet, somewhere empty, somewhere they hadn't paved over with forgetfulness yet. She didn't plan to fight again, but she'd be watching, just in case, just until someone else remembered. The ship slipped into darkness, and in the quiet that came after fire, the stars no longer looked down in silence. They bore witness, and they did not forget.